I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. He's also the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome back to the show, Rafe.
Thanks, Jim. Always a good idea to have me on at this time of the year. I can look out at the water and Bowen Island and just relax, and away we go.
And so far, your view isn't blocked by massive natural gas tanks.
No, it's not blocked. No LNG tankers out there yet. And as a matter of fact, it's amazing when you think of what there are 2.5 million people or whatever it is around us. I look out there now, and there's not a boat in sight. So it's lots of orca, I might say, have come back. Since Howe Sound got cleaned up. And, of course, we've got our good salmon runs back. The springs are finally in now. We expect big pink runs next month. And it's really good. Lots of seals and porpoises and all that kind of stuff. So it's good.
On the environmental front, Rafe, anything that we should be concerned about here in BC?
Well, I think there is one big issue now, Jim, and it's part and parcel of a longer issue. And let me just take a moment. I was born and raised in British Columbia, grew up here, etc., and I had sort of the same view of Indians as most people did, at least my father did. Most people did on the west side of Vancouver, and it wasn't very flattering. I had some pretty good contacts with them. They were very kind to me down at Musqueam when I used to fish down there, and in Musqueam Creek, we used to call it Tin Can Creek, but by and large, my father thought they were all shiftless bums, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you grew up with that in your mind. They didn't own any land, they were just reserves. Reserves were taken away from them. A lot of it was taken away by Sir Richard McBride, but that's what they had. They had no vote, and they were just sort of non-people, and you kind of ignored them. And as I moved on through life, when I became an MLA and went to Kamloops, I became very involved with the Kamloops Indian Band and 2 or 3 others. And Chief Mary Leonard was the toughest politician I ever met. And my mind started to change. I started thinking, what's going on here? But this time, of course, they'd got the vote and so on. And I gradually began to think, there's some misinformation here. A couple of pals used to come around to the Stocklands and have drinks with us, and they were bright as buttons, and so on and so forth. In any event, when I became a cabinet minister, well, I was then, but actually started going back to Toronto, in Ottawa, on the constitutional matters, the Supreme Court of Canada was deliberating on land claims. And my first reaction was much like everybody else as well. I don't want them to have all our land, for goodness sake. What's going on here? And then Delgamuck came down. And, I'm a lawyer, and I thought, well, I better read that and see what the hell it says. Well, I read it, and it just said to me, look, this is just the beginning, folks. You guys have not been playing fair. This land belongs to Native people. A lot of land you don't think belongs to Native people belongs to Native people, and you better get ready. And so I did. I started to think about it a lot, and I thought, you can't fight City Hall, and if that's what the Supreme Court of Canada says, that's what it's going to be. And then as it went along with various cases coming down, I frankly began to see the justice of what the Supreme Court of Canada was all about. And then, of course, I started to meet a lot more, call them Indians then, Indian chiefs, people of status in their community, et cetera. And I was overwhelmed. I thought, my dad didn't tell me there were people like this, really bright, sharp people that knew what the hell they were doing. And one thing led to another. I got involved in the Alcan fight. You may remember that. And There were a number of Indian bands that were horribly treated by that. One particular example, a bunch of hunters came home and found their houses and their graveyards and everything underwater. And when they protested, they were shown a document that they presumably signed, all with X's. Well, it didn't take very long to discover that every X was made by the same person, and it wasn't a native. So these sort of things started to really prey on me, and I thought, my God, we've got to come to grips with this. And I think at the same time, so did a hell of a lot of other people. I'm not pretending that I was any goody two-shoes about this. I think a whole bunch of people around British Columbia started to think, wait a minute, things are very different. We've got to get ready for it. So now we've come to 2016, and there are a host of decisions. One last year particularly was a very, very strong decision on land. And what's happening in the ocean? Why we're still have fish farms coming in, foreign fish farms, I might say, most of them from Norway, and they're being sold by the federal government. The Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans is actually a sales force for them. And the minister, LeBlanc, ironically, I signed the Salmonid Enhancement Program with his father, but he's saying, oh no, there's no conflict of interest here. Well, of course there's a conflict of interest here. And going back to Confederation, British Columbia has been treated very shabbily on the whole question of fish. So now, who's getting into the game big time but the First Nations? Now, they got a little bit of a problem because some of the First Nations, 2 or 3 of them, have got a reduction plan on their reserve, and that provides the only employment in the whole area. And they don't want to lose it, but that's something they're coming to grips with, and that kind of thing always happens. By and large, they are emphatically against it. So now we have 3 or 4 of them arrested the other day for serving a notice on one of the fish farm outfits that they got to get out of there. And, of course, along come the RCMP, and they arrest them, and we're waiting to see what charges are. I tell you that, all of that, to say this. The RCMP, of course, are doing what they're told by the government, but it shows me the government simply doesn't understand what's happened, doesn't understand what the force of history is, doesn't understand that this thing is not going to back up and go back to where it used to be. It's not going to even stand still. It's going to go ahead until there's a satisfactory settlement all the way around. And I know a lot of people say, well, I don't want all my land to go. Well, you've got to remember the First Nations have been pretty good about that when you think about it. They've declared all residential land and everything off limits to their claims and so on. But I guess the point I'm making, Jim, is here we are in 2016, almost through it, and we have not yet come to grips mentally, at least in our government, with the fact that we are going to have to make a big concession yet to come on these matters, and that the salmon are the staple of the diet of a great many First Nations, and they certainly belong to British Columbia, I would think, and the biggest claim against them is the Native Indian. And now what's happening? The federal government coming in with foreign companies and scooping them out, or not scooping them out, but exposing them to dangers from disease, escape, and that sort of thing. And I guess my point today, Jim, is simply this. We just don't, as a government, understand where we're at, and we're going to pay very, very hard for that lack of understanding. We've got to sharpen up and come into the current 21st century and understand that the force of history is not with us on that issue.
Well, we've had so many Supreme Court of Canada rulings telling us that you can't go ahead with these major projects without the approval of First Nations, yet somehow the government still feels these can be steamrollered through.
Well, they do, and the companies, a lot of them too, they think that writing a letter or something like that is consultation. And that's not consultation, Jim. You wouldn't accept that. I wouldn't accept it, nor anybody else. Consultation is really finding out what my case is all about, and if it has some merit, settling it or looking after it. That's not happening. And the governments are they're weak on this, but the Supreme Court of Canada is not. And the Supreme Court of Canada, with all the criticisms we have of how they're appointed and all the rest of it, when it comes to things like this, where it's not a political issue as far as they're concerned, when they make decisions, then you know that future decisions are going to follow that same line. And so we can't look at any decision we've had from the Supreme Court of Canada and say, oh, well, maybe the next Supreme Court will go this way, because they're not going to. They're going to carry on with the general theory. And it's not a question of liking it, not a question of saying, oh, well, Rafe Mair's this and all of that. That's not the issue. The issue is that's what it is. And you have to live with it, and you have to make the best of it. And if we have to do that, we might just as well make the best of it and sit down with our First Nations brethren and get this thing settled to everybody's satisfaction.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, I have a question about BC's taxation policy. It seems to me they like to brag about having the lowest income tax in Canada. But wait a second. If I try to book a ferry, I have to pay for it. If I want to go to a camping site, I have to pay for it if I can get one and it hasn't been snapped up by some foreign company to resell at a higher rate. My ICBC rates are going up. Hydro rates are going up 9% a year when consumption is going down. What about those? And I want to add medical premiums as well. Those, to me, are all taxes, yet the government claims to have low taxes.
If you're realistic about this, and you're honest about this, every penny, that goes from you, the citizen, to the government is a tax. You can call it anything you want, a fee or excuse me, Jim, but it's not. It's a tax. So it doesn't matter whether you call it a tax, you can call it a fee. Whatever it is, it's an impost on your pocketbook. And when governments say, oh, we got the lowest this, then you got to look for the place that it's highest, because it's going to push down one bump on the pie plate, another one pops up. And this is the way this government is going. Now, on top of that, they play a game, and I use this word carefully, a game of fraud with the public. They talk about balancing the budget. So now they have the lowest income tax and a balanced budget. Now, if you're part of an ordinary family and you've got a mortgage and car payments and so on, I'll come over and balance your budget for you in 10 seconds time. And it'll be very, very easy. I'll just simply say to you, look, take the house mortgage and take the car off the budget. You can call it anything you want. You can call it an unpaid something or other, whatever you want to do, or as old WAC used to call a contingent liability. You can have a balanced budget. You can walk to your banker and say, look, I got a balanced budget. Now, the first thing he's going to do is ask a lot of questions that the Minister of Finance in BC doesn't bother to ask because he wants to fool everybody. But the fact is that you've got technically a balanced budget. But you haven't. So this government is playing that double game. Now, when I'm talking about the balanced budget, just let me remind people of this. Not on that budget is the biggest impost on the public purse we have, BC Hydro. None of that money is on the budget. Now, every single penny the BC Hydro owes, you and I owe. This is on us, the public. And this same government has ruined BC Hydro since they came into government in 2001. And so you're now seeing them throw the BC Hydro out the window financially, and at the same time not having to show that on the books, then telling you their books are balanced. You know, the whole thing is a sham. So that's to me is the fraud. This government, for God's sake, you only have to look at the provincial debt, which has doubled since this government took office. It's more than the whole debt was up to when they got in. They've added more than the whole debt. And to have the jam to come around, tell everybody they got a balanced budget, we're at the easy street, where the gravy is rolling in. Jim, it's not even the usual puffery that you expect from politicians. Those are outright lies. They're just simply not true.
we keep seeing these ads on television all the time telling us BC's got the best economy in Canada, no worries, and you got to re-elect the Liberals if you want the best economy to continue. And of course, Christie is running Liberal government ads now during the evening newscasts telling us that jobs are her biggest priority. Has she created jobs, and is that their biggest priority?
Well, it's her biggest priority in words at election time. Of course it is. And it's an easy one because it's very, very difficult to actually demonstrate whether you have increased them or not. I don't think she's increased them a bit. Certainly not on any permanent basis, but we haven't had floods of people pouring into BC to take over jobs. Now, the jobs have been okay. There's no question about that. However, our unemployment comes and it goes. Do we have a prosperous province with what we have and looking down the road? And the answer is absolutely not. We don't. You have to pay these debts sometimes. That's what you and I and all kinds of other people listening tend to forget. When you owe $76 billion in BC Hydro, that isn't just some airy-fairy number up there on a wall. That is real money. And you and I owe that money, and that's got to be paid, whether you like it or not. Similarly with the provincial debt, you've got to pay it. So you can't very well say, oh, look, I've got $1,000 in the bank, I'm prosperous as hell, if you have $2,000 in debts coming due. And this is exactly what we're like in British Columbia.
Do you think the NDP has failed in their job as opposition to point out all of these problems?
Oh, no question about it, Jim. And I hate to say this. I know a number of them, and I know they're awfully hard-working, decent people. I've only met the leader once, and he seemed like a nice enough guy. But they have lost the notion of what being in opposition is all about. And the one time I met the leader will tell you how this has happened. When I met him, I said, I understand that you're pretty good with, do you think LNG is a good idea? Oh, yeah, he said, we can't be against everything. We're in favor of LNG. This was a social meeting. I didn't go into it very long, but it wasn't long afterwards that I wrote an article for the Common Sense Canadian, and I said to John Horgan, do you realize what you've done? You've foreclosed the right of your party to argue about anything to do with LNG. It isn't a question of being, well, I'm in favor of it here or under these circumstances or whatever it may be. For example, you can't come into my community and take a look at the wood fiber LNG proposal and pass judgment on that. And if you think it's as bad as the whole constituency does, speak against it because you're in favor of it. You can't be against the environmental problems we're going to have in Howe Sound with gunk going into the ocean and killing all the fish we've just started to restore. You can't do anything about that because you're in favor of it. You've got the Premier and the gumshoe going all around the world, first class, having a merry old time, selling something we don't have to people that don't want it, and there's all kinds of other LNG closer to the one they do. We paid something like $1 billion for these exercises. NDP can't do anything about that because they're in favor of LNG. And that they've put themselves back themselves into a corner. Now, what I've always said, and I may remind people that I've been there. I've seen what's supposed to be done. Lord Randolph Churchill back in the 1880s said simply, it's the duty of the opposition to oppose. And Horgan has said, and others have said, oh, well, no, we want to cooperate, we want this, one of the other thing. Jim, this is a parliamentary democracy, and that is not how it works. The public is entitled to have every single jot and tittle of government policy examined carefully, word by word by word, before anybody supports it. And again, I hate to be personal, but I can give you a pretty good example. When I was in government, I wanted to change all of the consumer law. I wanted to make it much different than it was. And the NDP, to a person, agreed. They said, yeah, it's about time. Good, we were going to do that, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Rafe starts to put his legislation in, one bill at a time. Every one of those bills was opposed right down the line. I was pilloried, yelled at, and all, just like the usual thing. And there come the end of third reading and time for the vote, they'd all vote for it. You say to yourself, well, why the hell would they put up all that fuss? because, Jim, that was their duty. It wasn't their duty just to say, oh, we think Rafe's got some good ideas. It was their duty to look for all of the unintended consequences, everything that could go wrong with it, and make sure that that has been done. Now, that's where they agree. Now, to agree in advance on something like, for example, like LNG, in all its manifestations, is absolute madness, and they're now paying for it. There are so many things now that they simply cannot oppose because of this. And it's sad because you can't have a good operating parliamentary democracy without a first-rate tough opposition. We had one when I was in government, hated every moment of it, disliked every time I had to go into estimates, all the rest of it, but it made us better. It made us a good government, actually, and that's what you have to have. And Horgan has tied his own hands, and you can see it now. You just raised it. Where is he with all of these issues that are popping up all over the place? Where has he been on balanced budgets and that sort of stuff? He's been nowhere. Now, I'm not bad-mouthing him personally. I'm sure he's a very fine man, husband and father and all the rest of it. But he is a lousy leader of the opposition if he doesn't understand the basic principle of it. The statement by Randolph Churchill 25 or 30 years ago is not only just as apt now as it was then, it's even more apt now because government is more complicated, more things are happening, more things have to be examined, and the unintended consequences alone, never mind malicious things, are much greater than they ever were. And if you don't have an opposition examining each and every aspect of policy and litigation, you might just as, or legislation, you might just as well not have an opposition at all.
Has the NDP handed the next provincial election to the Liberals?
The only reason they might not have is that the Liberals are so bad that the public may just be prepared to throw anybody in if they can throw them out. Now, that's a lousy way to go into an election if you're an opposition leader. You should be there with a government in waiting. You shouldn't be there saying, well, we might just get lucky and they get thrown out and we'll fall in. But that's the only way I think that it'll happen. They certainly are not going to get elected on merit. There's no question about that.
Well, last election, I know Adrian Dick said, I'm not going to bring up any dirty tricks or mention the government's record. But in the end, that's the only thing that looked good.
Well, you see, that's the whole point I'm trying to make, Jim. Politics is tough. It's a dirty game in lots of ways, etc. But you're the one in there. You got in there voluntarily, and you've got to play the game as it is played. Now, there are some things I think are gone wrong. I think the private lives of people should be off limits. They no longer are. Thank God they were when I was there, because I had a divorce in the middle of it all. But those things are. But I think those things they're not relevant. But other stuff that happens, yes. I mean, even things like these $25,000 dinners or whatever it is that her Nibs has, and all of the. Well, wait a minute. Let me stop. Maybe go here. BC Hydro and the IPP policy, the independent power producers, is probably the biggest scam that I, in all my 85 years, have ever heard of. Here they are. These guys are getting double to 3 times the amount of the price of electricity. They have a private monopoly on the whole thing. They donate huge amounts of money to the provincial Liberals. Why not? And they're getting that not on merit, getting that because we decided we wouldn't worry about the environment in these rivers. We'd sacrifice them, we'd ruin them, and we'd pay off Liberal pals. Now, where in the hell have the opposition been on that? They haven't been anywhere on it. And the worst of them all, frankly, is Weaver. You would think that Weaver be all over them for what they've been doing to these rivers, but the answer is he hasn't, and nor has anybody else. Let me tell you a very quick story about Weaver. Back in 2000 and I think 2009, was it? It was earlier than that. 2008. In any event, Weaver declared, he wasn't a Green Party MLA at that time, but he declared that run of the river, these IPP things, were clean, green power. Well, a lot of people, maybe you, I certainly sort of went along with it. It looked all right to me. You know, just take a little bit of electricity out of the river and don't disturb it. Don't put, it seemed all right. But make a long story short, I was taken to see the Ashley River. Now, the Ashley River and what had been done was there when Weaver made his decision. It was there for all to see. I went there, Jim, and I could not believe my eyes. I thought these were little mom-and-pop operations taking just a little bit of electricity. There were no dams. No dams? I don't know what the hell you call that big thing that's stopping all the water. Or you call it a weir. That makes it a non-dam, I guess. Huge powerhouse being fed. A tiny trickle of water left for the fish to go upstream, which they won't take because it's not their stream to begin with, and there's not enough water in it, etc. They were ruining that river before our very eyes, and anybody could see it. And Weaver didn't bother to go and look at it, and he still stands by that policy. So where is the opposition? I am damned if I know. The opposition is in people, I suppose, like Eric Anderson and Norm Farrell, and I suppose myself and others, that campaigned in 2 campaigns against these things, try to tell people what they're all about, try to write about them, and nobody would print us. And we're the only ones that have been saying anything. And this is the hard part, Jim. Every single solitary thing we said has come true plus. And there's no opposition. I don't know where the hell they are. They're just out to lunch on it. And the government is going along pretending it's a wonderful idea. And BC Hydro is going bankrupt as they do it. Forgive me for getting a little worked up, but Joe, I was once in a government, and I couldn't believe that like this would happen if I'd been in government. My God, I'd have been pilloried. I'd probably been thrown on the street and hung up on a pole. It's just beyond belief. There's just not been a word out of them, and there it is.
Elizabeth May and the Israel issue. Should she still be the leader of the National Green Party?
Well, I don't think that disqualifies her from that. I think where Elizabeth's problem was in the handling of that issue. First of all, it's not an issue that should have been part of a convention and become part of party policy. The Green Party is different than others. Let me try to explain why. Most parties want to get into office, and so they have all kinds of policies that they can play on when they go to elections, change and all the rest of it, so that they can say we're this, we're that, we're the other thing, and get elected. The Green Party is a philosophical party. It is an environmental party. It makes it very, very different. And what they have to gain is power, not office. And let me explain what I mean by that. Back in the 1930s, in the wilderness years in Britain, a man went up to Winston Churchill and said, it must be awful for you now, under the circumstances, the way you stand on these things, to be out of power. And Churchill growled. He said, out of office, perhaps, but I'm not out of power. And that was a very, very good point, because he sure as hell wasn't, as we all found out. This is what the Greens should be aiming at, because look at what they've done around the world in other places. They haven't held office anywhere, except in Europe. They're very, very powerful, and the things that they have wanted to be done have been done. People pay a lot of attention to them. New Zealand, Australia, the same thing. And that's what Elizabeth May and the Green Party have got to do, is solidify their ability to use their strengths to convince people to see that their policies are implemented even though they're not in office. The chances of the Green Party getting in office in the next 10 or 15 years are slim and none. Everybody knows that. So what you've got to do is exercise what you have as power, and they've got a power. Well, you and I all know that from what has happened with the environment in terms of this issue over the last 8 or 10 years. They've got an issue that will give them all the influence in the world. Now, you start getting out on things like the Israeli-Palestine issue and that kind of stuff. First of all, it's something that isn't really what you're trying to do in any event as a Green Party. But secondly, what it does is divides the party on issues that really aren't the ones they should be fighting about. I suspect that was deliberately done. I don't know that, but it has all the earmarks of a coup d'etat having taken place. But in any event, that's what Elizabeth has to do. Now, if she doesn't do that, then she won't stay on as leader, and the Green Party will suffer for it. But remember this, I think, Jim. The Green Party now represents something that isn't going to go away. So somebody is going to be doing that somewhere along the line, and I think the party will bounce back, and they'll be strong, and they'll get the proper leaders. But right now, unless Elizabeth comes to her senses very, very quickly, they're in deep trouble nationally, And provincially, it's unbelievable, because I would have thought they had a chance to win this election a year ago. It's a non-event. And so they've got a lot of work to do. But they've got to stay on target, stay on issues. You know, you can't go around and start talking about things that have nothing whatever to do with what your objectives are, because you're never going to be able to do anything about them in the foreseeable future. Stick to what you can do something about.
Rafe, thank you so much for chatting with us.
My pleasure always, Jim. Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. You can check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.